We do a lot of work to try and understand how people react and behave in emergency situations, primarily fire, but not just fire. And as part of that, we do a lot of studies into past disasters. We look at interviewing survivors of incidents. We do experimental work. We do lots of observation. And the observation helps us, informs our understanding of how people react in certain situations. And based on that, we can use that information to build models. And the models are the really powerful thing that we have, because the models give us an ability to apply what we've learnt about human behaviour in different types of aspects, and gives us the power to predict how people behave. So observing and quantifying human behaviour leads to a better understanding, which enables us to model and hence predict behaviour. Predicting behaviour provides us with a general way to improve both the physical design of a structure, but also the procedures you put in place to manage that structure, and it also helps you to develop regulations. So we have this cycle of observation, we then apply theory to this, provides us a better understanding. With that better understanding, we can develop rules and algorithms, which help us develop models. The models enable us to predict what's going on, but then we use the models again, going back to the observation to see if we can validate the models. Very important to validate the models to make sure that they provide us with some a proper representation of reality. If we just simply base our regulation, as we tend to do, simply on observation alone, and limited observation at that, I believe that gives us very poor regulation, because it's highly specific. The observation might be based on a very small, narrow parameter set. And so the regulation that might come out of that might be appropriate for that situation, but not in general. If we apply some theory to the observation and help us to develop our understanding, that gives us better regulation, but the regulation is still fairly limited based on our limited understanding. If we look at how we can apply our models, I believe this gives us a more optimal approach to regulation, because it's highly adaptable. And as long as we've got validated models, we can then apply this to a range of design issues and also regulation.
The models that we find in my group, and indeed others find particularly useful for understanding behaviour, are dual process models. And there are a range of these. And they have in common drawing a distinction between two sets of processes, which, broadly speaking, overlap in the different ways in which these are operationalized. So some of you will have read Danny Kahneman's book, so be aware of slow and fast thinking, or sometimes mapped onto conscious, non-conscious, goal-directed, habitual, reflective, or automatic. And most interventions which have aimed at changing behaviour have attempted to target what we could call reflective processes. So the idea is to provide information to try to change your beliefs about the outcome of the behaviour in question, with a view to changing your intentions, which in turn are imagined to change your behaviour. And while sometimes that works, the latest evidence would suggest that, as the quote from this meta-analysis suggests, that intentional control of behaviour, so that is the relationship between our intentions and our behaviour, is much more limited than has previously been thought, and that really we would do well to focus on non-intentional routes to action. So that brings us on to the second set of processes which actually govern the vast majority of our behaviour. So these are sort of processes that have very, very fast, automatic, and arguably untapped potential in a policy field. And thinking across all civil emergencies, there's always a concern about vulnerable groups. So what can we do to increase social connections, reduce loneliness, which is a good in itself, before we've even hit anything resembling an emergency? So my modest proposal is, why don't we start focusing on changing behaviour for the emergency, but before it's there, we need to think about non-conscious routes to behaviour, because they can be much more effective than conscious routes, particularly by changing environments. And the behaviours we might focus on are likely to have benefits beyond that of the emergency, such as washing hands with soap. And I would argue that the behavioural analysis is needed for all civil emergencies. So for those of you who noted this little creature on my first slide, I want to return to a theme that was introduced by Mark Walpert at this conference last year, where he talked about the importance of seeing all problems through multiple lenses, which I think is terribly helpful. And so my slightly less modest proposal is that behaviour is one of the key lenses through which we should look at all policies, both in their creation and also in their realisation.
For me as a policy professional, one of the really important things that came out of this interaction, and for those of you who are on the Policy Fellowship, where I would really encourage you to look at this as a possible model, though other universities are available, is to look at the interaction that others have had with the academics. I hadn't met Ed before, we certainly have now, and what we can learn directly from them, but also when you're in a situation where you need the academic input, you know where these guys live. And that for us has been really helpful. And we're actually using now a couple of the academics that we worked with in some real life situations that we're working with. One of the questions that was asked of the government chief scientist was, is everything that can be done being done? And Mark Walpert, who is my boss, set about answering that question with a range of experts from the physical sciences through to the social sciences. And I believe that we gave quite good input into both DEFRA and the Environment Agency in helping them come up with their plan for how are they going to sort of tackle this in the future. But during all of this, it gave me greater focus on some of the very interesting interactions that were going on with the public. And you will have seen on the television people being given plenty of notice that the Thames was going to flood. I think they had 5 days' notice. There was no question that certain properties were going to flood. The emergency services invited people to evacuate. A lot of people said, no, fine, I'll stay. Irrational, you're going to flood. So, coming back to personal rationality, why would you stay in a property there is no doubt is going to flood? It comes back to that sort of fear of loss. People were very frightened that their houses were going to be burgled. People were worried about the cat. There was all sorts of personal rationality that we need to get better at understanding. One of the other features that we saw was those who were heavily involved in dealing with the emergency, people on the ground, were having to deal with quite a lot of abuse. In one particular set of circumstances on the Somerset levels, certain responders were being advised by the police to evacuate, not the publics, but the emergency responders were being advised to leave because they were being abused, and the abuse was getting quite strong. So why was that? I'm not even going to look at my academic colleagues here, but might it have been because people want to blame someone? Might it have been? So it was an incredibly interesting set of behaviours for me to watch, very interesting for me to be involved in. And I think that there is a lot from the recent British flooding for us to learn, particularly on behaviours and how we work better with that.
We have to really understand the human behaviour and what people are likely to do. Same as the issue in Japan. It ignores the fact that people are people, and they're going to want to reunite with their loved ones before they secure their own safety. And we have to accept that and then find ways to work around that so that our systems will work better, given that's what people are going to do. It's better to understand what people are going to do and then develop your mitigation strategies around what people are likely to do, rather than trying to force a behaviour that's going to be very difficult to change. And you only do that with knowledge and insight as to what people are actually going to do.
5 a day, I think the majority of the population know that. The majority of the population don't change their behaviour. What we're interested in is people changing their behaviour. I think that the campaign in Australia for protecting yourself from the sun, slip, slap, slop, that part of, as one of several interventions, particularly shifting social norms. So in Australia, if you turn up red from having, not protected yourself, it's kind of, it's embarrassing. So you're red for two reasons. So that seems to have been quite effective. But we're talking there about developing habits. So if it's reinforced by other messages, behaviour of others, social norms shift, then these can be effective. But the ask is absolutely huge.
Our study of the World Trade Center took place some 6 years after the collapse of the building, 5 years after the collapse of the buildings. And we still got a lot of valuable information, but it would have been, I was struggling to pull this together 6 months after 9/11, and it took me that long to get the funding support after 2 failed attempts with the EPSRC and the US government telling me to go away. It took that long to get that up and running, and it would have been a lot more effective had we kicked that off as soon as possible after that event. These events are like huge laboratories for us. They are much better than any staged experiment we can do, because we could never put people under those conditions. And so we've had the recent flooding situation. We desperately wanted to go in and start interviewing people and finding out about the behaviours, why they were doing certain things. We couldn't get any financial support to do it. No one gave me the impression that they were interested, even though there's lots of lip service about, yes, this is so important and we need resilience and all, but no one wanted to know. No one was prepared to fund that sort of activity. So I really think what you said is very important, and we really do need to do this. I tried to, from the European Union, I tried to get them to fund something on the Framework 7, which I call the GO team. So we would pull together experts in behavioural sciences, so that when there was an event, we would have the funding in place. We wouldn't have to go and ask for it. It'd be in place. People would be ready to go, and we'd be able to go to the scene and begin to collect data. Unfortunately, the behavioural sciences part of the FP7 didn't think it was a valuable enough thing to fund, so it was never funded. But I really think that's very, very important, and we need to be able to do that as quickly as possible.